split zone duo, Alex Kirshner. I would like the record to reflect I did not put the Fighting Florida Gators top of the rundown this week.
No, I did, because I thought that this episode, in the name of acquiring as many podcast listeners as possible, should begin with some broad existential questions about the SEC. And among those is me wondering out loud if Florida is now at least neck and neck with Georgia as the favorite to win the SEC East.
I mean, they're more than neck and neck. They got voted SEC East champion by our writer friends, the SEC. I think we're going to know pretty soon after this week for two reasons, and we'll get to this obviously, but what Georgia's offense does on Saturday and what Florida's defense does on Saturday is going to go a long way to determine whether I actually think what happened on Saturday is indicative of the changing of the tides that I hope.
I think they're very good. I think that Kyle Pitts is pretty easily the best tight end in not only in college football right now, but I think in a minute or two that we've had in college football. There just aren't many dudes like him, even in the SEC. I think that the entire offense is no longer your Jim McElwain Florida offense. I think it's now pretty close to fully operational under Dan Mullen, and I think that they are probably due for some very good things this year. But I actually want to talk, and that was kind of just a Trojan horse. I want to talk about the team that Florida beat up on pretty badly on Saturday. And of course, that is Ole Miss. And anytime I talk about any entity based in the state of Mississippi, I go to one man. And that is a special guest who we'd like to welcome into our show. Stephen Godfrey, how are you today?
Oh, hello. Yeah, I just happened to be here. How are you guys?
Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks.
Good to see
Welcome
you.
back.
Yeah.
Well, everything is Mississippi when you think about it, so it's always good to start in Mississippi.
Absolutely. Mississippi is where everything begins. Ole Miss is interesting to me this upcoming weekend, sort of because of the way that they got their butts kicked by Florida at home last weekend. I think that their biggest problems against Florida were, A, that they did not have anybody who could cover Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. Most teams do not have guys who can cover those guys, but Ole Miss very much didn't and very much doesn't. I think that any upper tier receiving core in the SEC is probably going to be an issue for Ole Miss this year. But the other big problem for Ole Miss was that Florida's front was in the backfield frequently. The offensive line looked at times completely overwhelmed. And this weekend, Ole Miss is playing a team that is very much not Florida, and really, I think, has a much different profile in Kentucky. I have Ole Miss as a vested interest in this game at plus 6.5, and I feel very optimistic about that because Kentucky had a very anemic pass rush against Auburn last week. I think Bo Nix dropped back to throw like 30 times, and he was pressured exactly twice, which was a different world than Ole Miss QBs getting pressured 19 times on 45 dropbacks. I think that Ole Miss is going to be able to give John Rice Plumlee and Matt Corral a considerable amount of time to throw, run, do whatever it is they decide to do. And on the other hand, Kentucky does not have playmakers of the Pitts-Toney variety. I think that we're going to be talking about Ole Miss in a different way this time next weekend or next week than we are right now.
So.
I think that we are going to have an interesting Ole Miss weekend. That's my medium hot take about this upcoming SEC weekend. But Richard, you don't think Ole Miss is going to do anything here?
Well, in a second, I want to hear Godfrey on this, but I think Ole Miss is going to play 12 of the exact same football game, 10 of the exact same football games. I think it's going to be now Kentucky has a barrier to entry as far as scoring points goes, so maybe we'll adjust it for Kentucky. But I really and truly think you're going to score a shit ton of points on them, and they're going to score a shit ton of points on you. And we look around at the end and we see who's left standing. How was last week received from our friends in Oxford, Godfrey?
Not as in tune with the program as I once was. I don't know if I could really claim to have like a consensus on the local reaction, but I think in football terms, it's about what football people outside of Oxford expected, right? Lane Kiffin is an ingenious play caller. They did some really fun things. Wide receivers are going to throw touchdown passes, and you are going to see rotating quarterbacks, and you are going to see really fun, neat schematic things that show up on Twitter where Lane Kiffin hangs out, he wears funny T-shirts, and he's very, personable and tells jokes. In the football sense of things, I don't think much has changed at all, really, because, I wrote a little bit about this kind of rounding up that weird SEC opening weekend schedule where all these good teams beat all these bad teams, exception for Mississippi State. Ole Miss still doesn't have a defense and an offensive line because those are the two things that NCAA probation rob from you when you go on probation. And I'm not here to litigate all that. I'm just saying when you have scholarship restrictions, your line is the first thing that shows up. That basically you see that deterioration because you lose depth, and then you're not able to get skill guys on defense. And that's kind of still the same team. I thought Florida was good. I really like Trask. It's weird. I don't want to take apart anything Florida did on offense, but also I completely and totally expected it. They looked a little sleepy, but I think that's kind of what Lane Kiffin does to you. And this is also where I just kind of stop talking, throw out the asterisk, and say, all right, first week, COVID season, hard to really create any context from this. But I agree with what Richard said. You're going to see 10 very entertaining games, the results of which will look insane.
Yeah, I think Florida, as far as the thing that doesn't bother me is the tackling. If you can't tackle after COVID offseason, where you probably weren't hitting that much, where you definitely weren't taking anybody to the ground, et cetera, I'm not worried about the tackling. I think I said this on Sunday. I want Florida's entire defense to be back. I think that front is going to be pretty good. I have some agita about the secondary, but again, COVID season against the Lane Kiffin offense you didn't know was coming at you. If they snuff out South Carolina, I think they're supposed to on Saturday, that's where you're like, okay, we got some going here. They are what we think they are. They are who we thought they were going to be. They are going to need to find consistent edge rushing. I think they were good up the middle, and I'm okay with that, but they are going to need to find a consistent and lethal edge rusher. Jonathan Gradon's not around anymore. That is sort of a talking point all off season that I do greatly believe in.
Everything that I saw Saturday would tell me that they are the second best team in the SEC. It's so silly. We do this and we guard against it and we preach against it. Don't create context from small samples, right? It's one game in this super weird season, and yet here we are, and it does feel like, all right, okay, Florida's the second best team in this conference right now.
If you think I'm not trying to worm my way to Atlanta a couple days before Christmas through SEC Network connections, you are firmly incorrect.
Hey, look, if that's your look,
I'm booking the ticket.
If that's your holiday tradition, being victimized by Alabama and Mercedes-Benz, then go for it.
Speaking of Alabama, Alex.
Speaking of Alabama, the team that I think a big reason that Ole Miss needs to play well at Kentucky and get some proof of concept on the board is that Alabama is Ole Miss' next opponent, and that is not going to happen there. So I think there's also a lot of pressure on Ole Miss to be good this week. Alabama, we didn't talk about them at all, I don't believe, on the whip around that we did on Sunday. We didn't talk about them much last week.
Because they tore somebody limb
exactly,
from limb. Of
there's
course they did.
not a lot to say.
About them.
And we're going to keep this part of the program very quick. But I did watch some of that game, and I think you guys have seen a bit of Alabama. Any Bama observations so far from you guys that are more detailed than it's Alabama and this is college football?
Yeah, I think that probably the most interesting thing about them is that they were not interesting or unique, or they did not look COVID affected whatsoever. So if you had to look at one
that I agree with.
If you had to look at one game last week that you could isolate, and other than the fact there's no fans in the stands and that kind of stuff, or there's masks on coaches' faces, if you looked at one game and just pulled it out of time, it could have been in 2018, it could have been in 2014, it could have been in 2012. That was Alabama. Slow cooker.
Week 1, Alabama up 30-something to single digit.
Yep.
And we move on.
And then we draw out plays and we slow down drives, and we're so physical that we can create any kind of pace we want to whenever we want to. And we're going to use the back end of this dominant but not insane score differential to try out some guys in the secondary, run our twos out a little bit. That was an Alabama game against a lesser conference opponent in any year. So that, if we are drawing conclusions and doing the thing I just said not to, would lead me to believe that Alabama is going to be the best team, at least for a little while, because obviously they've been able to mitigate everything else, all the COVID circumstances that other teams, LSU, seem to have suffered from.
For me, one Bama observation, primarily from the second half of that game, is that I don't think that they are entirely there yet on trusting Bryce Young, the five-star freshman who is their number 2 behind Mac Jones. I think there's been, understandably, a lot of anticipation that maybe at some point, even this year, Bryce Young would be the guy for them. That is still, of course, possible. I don't know any reason why it wouldn't. But just the way that they called the game, that Steve Sarkisian called the game while Bryce Young was in doing mop-up duty, the training wheels were very much on. And that made me curious that maybe Alabama does not, quite feel comfortable there yet.
That was an A.J. McCarron era play calling effort. and you can do that at Alabama because you have depth and you have that running game and you have all of those skill position players. You can slow things down and adjust versus shoehorn quarterbacks into bad situations. I mean, this was just, it's kind of very pre-Kiffin. The Kiffin effect on Alabama, to me, creates a turning point of the Saban era because it changed the kind of athletes that they put in different positions, the way that they use those athletes, and I think, honestly, a little bit of attitude change, too. So, to me, it was like 2012, 2013, but here's the deal. It was unsexy, but, man, those were like that's still a really effective brand of Alabama football.
I'll be honest with the audience. I watched this game purely through the supercut of Jalen Waddle targets and receptions. Jalen Waddle, the way he moves, and I talked about this all year last year with Jerry Jeudy, the way he moves. The way Jalen Waddle moves is unique. It is special. The footwork is truly outstanding. The touchdown that they had, I think it was his first touchdown. It was the shorter of his touchdowns. When it's a condensed formation, it's on the right side of the field side's pretty wide. They motion him back and then motion him out and then snap the ball and just sort of screen it out to him, pitch it out to him. The way he moves from his original position to near Mac Jones, then gets the ball, then takes it to the end zone. It's all one fluid motion, one fluid speed, and then he kicks it into gear the last 5 yards to get to the pylon. Holy hell. It was really, really cool.
Last thought. We've joked for years about overstocking personnel and coaching analytics, analysts, just taking every fired coach and creating an office for them in Tuscaloosa. Theoretically, I'm not advocating for this system. It is probably a gross abuse of funds, and it's just a very bizarre version of oversigning coaches. In this COVID-affected 2020, maybe Alabama is best suited to win the SEC, not because of a player or a coach or a scheme, but it's just because they literally have the manpower to simulate all of these bizarre circumstances that are unique to 2020 and then build out a response to that, whereas other programs seem to be blindsided.
Yeah, they're doing some of this 2s and 3s stuff with just better 2s and 3s. Okay, across the state, Auburn. Auburn kind of played with their food a little bit with Kentucky and then finally sort of dropped the clutch and ran away from them. That's how Kentucky wants to play football. Get it down in the dirt, get it mucky, get it ugly, win the game. Alex, you think Auburn's offensive line is better? Do you think Bo Nix is better too? Or wait,
very much unsure about the latter. I don't know. I do think Auburn's offensive line, which has been not really what Auburn fans have come to expect for a couple of years now. I mean, Auburn's running game has just not been, I think, in 2018 or 2019, up to what Gus's standard had been there. I think that is going to be helped this year by the fact that offensive line seems to be sharper. I mentioned that Bo Nix was barely touched. I think he got hit twice or less on 30 dropbacks, and Auburn ran the ball okay in that game as well. So I think that's the thing for Auburn because those wide receivers are awesome. I mean, it's other than Florida having Pitts and Tony and Alabama having all of those guys, I think that's probably the best receiving group in the SEC. Is those three guys that Auburn has. So if the offensive line's good, I don't see why this could not be a year in which Auburn would be, certainly relevant until, late November.
Do we think this is the best Auburn receiving core he's had? I mean, even better than the national championship year?
Probably TBD.
Okay.
I would think that I think that in terms of NFL potential, I've already seen a number of the NFL draft eval types that we follow salivating over Seth Williams, and understandably so. I mean, a guy like that, there's just not a whole lot that can be done about him. And I don't think that, Auburn has had a few of those athletes, but they have tended to be, either if depending on how far you want to go back. I mean, that could be Cam, or that could be like a Derek Brown playing on the defensive line. I mean, Auburn's had a lot of guys who are just incredible physical presences, and for the most part, I don't feel like they've been a receiver. Certainly not three of them.
With Williams, Schwartz, and Stove, you've got three guys there. Go ahead, Godfrey.
One would assume they're going to be more effective scoring, a little bit more effective on their drives when they don't play Kentucky, because Kentucky's a really good metric for good SEC teams, right? Whatever they are, like the world's most annoying 7 or 8 win team in the conference, they tend to muddy up really, really good competition. And Richard Florida can speak to this. You either aren't prepared for Kentucky, which is kind of stopped now that they've made their name. They're so aggressive defensively, and the way that they've done this like bits and pieces offense of just running the ball and being very ugly and just, they're probably the most effective ugly ground team in the league. It's really hard to figure out what Auburn's going to be after an opponent like that. So very few teams have come in and just absolutely whipped on a Stoops Kentucky team. So scoring 29, I kind of feel like the ceiling might be higher than that once they get a different kind of opponent. Although, I will say this to bridge over, I don't know if we're going to know after Georgia either. Because if there's a saving grace for Georgia, it would be that defense.
I think if Auburn is able to put up points on Georgia, and when I talk about put up points on Georgia, I mean if Auburn sniffs 35 against Georgia, I think we really got something here.
All right, what about this,
Auburn.
Richard? What if they just score 10 early? They jump to a 10-0 lead, because Georgia's offense, good God, you couldn't go into panic mode. You can't speed that thing up right now, right? So you're going to just press and press and press, create mistakes. And the bottom line is you can't say anything about Auburn as a program without crediting Kevin Steele for keeping it together the last 3 or 4 years. So if that offense, regardless of who the quarterback is, goes into the teeth like that, Auburn, there's a way if Auburn scores early, they could win this game big.
Yes, absolutely. If Auburn gets ahead here and forces Georgia to press, they can absolutely win early. Win that way. Does Gus take the ball out of Bo's hands, so to speak, should that happen? I don't know if he needs to, but he might.
It's going to be interesting as well that we haven't seen JT Daniels in a full year. I mean, he was hurt at the the first or second week of last year. So much about how we view the SEC this year seems to me like it hinges on how his leg is. And
look, I've been hammering this for 9 months. I've been hammering this back from last year. If the offense has for the offense to have a different gear, I hope that JT can deliver that, but I do not think he can. I do not think it's his fault that he can't. His knee exploded against Utah. Go ahead, Godfrey.
No, I was going to say this. I was actually going to kind of transition out of this because I'm hesitant to ascribe any value to JT Daniels based on the system at Georgia, because it's obvious that they were planning on another quarterback in that system. Jamie Newman leaving is maybe the most impactful thing for a top 10 team, top 15 team in the entire country this year. I mean, in terms of the opt-outs, things that you could say are COVID affected. And I wrote about this. You can link to the publicized outbreak in Athens pretty much the week he made his final decision. Actually, guys, I'm good. I'm going to get out of here. Those two things are linked. I don't want to give a value too high or too low on Daniels because, honestly, mea culpa, I did not expect KJ Costello to set the SEC single game passing record.
No,
this was
not week one, not against that team.
This was a guy who was a functional, mid-level manager in a functional C+ Stanford team for a couple years, right? Nothing about what he put on film at Stanford said that he would come in, instantly click with what Leach has to offer, instantly be able to develop rapport with receivers. But this is the system. Sometimes we reject things outright in the industry because we're tired of something being true. And a lot of people wanted to say kind of mean things about Mike Leach going to Mississippi State and coming in the SEC. Some people are critical of him for different reasons, but a lot of people in the coaching industry are just mad because he generates so much publicity. The bottom line is this, as COVID changed the offseason, so too should we have probably leaned in Leach's favor, especially when you look at the sheer number of defections that happen at LSU, right? You lose 20 players to NFL rosters. You lose another, I think it's 15 to either transfers or opt-outs. That's an insane number. Meanwhile, Leach will tell you publicly he has the easiest system to install in the nation, in the sport, right? So if you don't have spring football, if you have less contact in summer camp, if you move your practices around, if you reschedule the season, all these kind of things that normally upend other programs, theoretically, and it was proven true, like Leach is fine with that because he's not going to adjust that much depending on the opponent.
Speaking of Mike Leach, I think they are running Mike Leach stuff at Mike Leach's dear old alma mater of BYU.
Go on.
They are running the air raid at BYU. That's not all they're doing, but go and run that tape. I mean, they ran mesh like 4 or 5 times in the first quarter against Troy on Saturday night.
Yeah.
This team is going to go undefeated. Alex, please take it away.
They really might go undefeated. They are 2-0. They have played Navy and Troy. They have won those games by a combined score of 103-10. That has beaten Vegas, beaten the spread by 77.5 points in 2 games. They've gone from the 50s in SP Plus to, I believe, 27th right now. I think at the moment they have 8 games scheduled, though this changes like every 5 minutes. But it is pretty clear, Richard, to your point that they might go, that you say they are going to go undefeated, that they really might go undefeated. I'm not sure that it's like a likelihood, but it's at least very close to 50-50. If they only play, play the games on their schedule right now. Let me read these off to you. Louisiana Tech, UTSA, Houston, which we don't know what they are and they may never play, but Texas State, Western Kentucky, North Alabama, in what is currently slated to be their finale. It changes all the time. I don't know what their actual schedule at the very end of the day is going to look like, but these are all home games. Every single game that I just mentioned to you. And they're all against teams that BYU is way bigger than. I mean, BYU's offensive line has been pulverizing. Something is going on here that is very interesting with BYU.
Well, I'll tell you this. First of all, the Warren Manziel is back. Zach Wilson is doing the thing. That dude is ripping the ball. Holy shit. When the way that ball comes out of his hands is like stunning. I think when you watch him, and a lot of people are going to sort of, their eyes are going to pop out of their head when I say this, he throws the deep ball like Aaron Rodgers in this way. When you watch Aaron Rodgers, when Aaron Rodgers really cuts it loose, he does this thing where he basically throws off of one foot. It's because he's getting so much of the back hip. He's generating so much force with that hip that he's quite literally like jumping out of his shoes to spin the ball. The way the ball spins out of Zach Wilson's hand is different. The way it finishes deep is different. This guy, maybe they may need to figure out some stuff on the intermediate stuff because he's throwing through receivers. But I think some of these air raid concepts have been put in to maximize what Zach Wilson can do throwing the ball. We know that Kalani has last year, particularly when he got hurt, last year it seemed like they were trying to play the sport between the numbers on offense and defense. They were trying to keep the game between the numbers. Now they are using space in a very unique way for Kalani Sitake's BYU. I went ahead and generated some spreads as things stand today for the rest of their schedule. Get a load of this. Louisiana Tech, 18-point favorite. UTSA, 26.5-point favorite. Houston, 9-point favorite. That's the lowest one. Texas State, 22-point favorite. Western Kentucky, 12-point favorite. If the games were played today, and that's on a neutral field. I'm serious. I think this BYU team is made to go undefeated. Now, Alex, Godfrey, what happens if they go undefeated? That is a different story.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Godfrey, what's that political mess going to be like if BYU is undefeated?
These are the kind of simulations that I love because essentially it's going to break the system of the college football playoff and the committee and the 4-team format, 2-game format. in multiple ways. Guys, this isn't even a Group of 5 conference member.
Right. They are not eligible. They are not even eligible for the Group of Five's token the New Year's Bowl slot. They aren't even eligible for it. They're not a partner in that enterprise.
Correct, Alex.
Why is it because they're independent? Why is that? I honestly
because they are an independent, and the exceptions that are created for Notre Dame are not created for FBS independents. They are created for Notre Dame specifically. So that leaves a program. Really, the only other program that you could talk about in this context is BYU. So this is a fiercely interesting system breaker for me. Here's the other funny one. As we transition over, because I'm going to talk about both of these teams, but also this is not something the playoff was prepared for. I don't want to jump ahead of myself on how excited I'm going to be to watch the stupid rationale unfold if all of the power conferences truly do come back. If the Pac-12 plays a limited schedule, if the Big Ten plays a limited schedule, how in the hell merit is going to be determined by the traditional methodology to create 4 teams in a bracket? If BYU is standing undefeated, having played possibly 3 or 4 more games than some other conferences, it's impossible to ignore. And by the way,
buddy, watch them do it.
You still have a potentially undefeated Group of 5 school. Cincinnati just started, right? You still have potentially, you could have an undefeated AAC champion that's making a claim here. Obviously, you won't have the MAC, or you could, but it's such a small sample set. You could have 2 of these teams against 6 or 7 game scheduled schools. This is the kind of absolute system breaking mess that I've been waiting for. Now, I will say this: the one team that could have broken BYU was the team that they were supposed to play 2 weeks ago, and that's Army. Army, BYU, not happening because of COVID, is going to be a monumental change in pretty much everything outside of the SEC, the ACC, in terms of if we're serious about letting these teams into a postseason scenario this year, that game not happening could change a lot.
Well, you saw what they did to Navy, so we'll see. We would have seen, obviously, what they would have done to Army.
Okay, all right, let's go there.
This is my thing though. Do you if you're the AAC champion, right? You're the AAC champion, and you finish your season the first week of December the way it usually is. Everybody else is playing up until Christmas. The ACC championship game is 5 days before Christmas. Everybody else is playing a few days before Christmas. If you're Cincinnati, why not add BYU? I'm serious. BYU has to.
It's
BYU
not a bad
is going
idea.
to have to add somebody.
You know who they might add?
BYU is not going to get into the playoff.
Do you know who they might add?
Schedule.
And what makes a lot of sense is a certain Mountain West school that plays on blue turf and plays BYU every year. Well, I just let it go because you couldn't have told who it was before. There would have been no way to know. Boise State is coming back. They are going to play football this year. They play BYU every year. I'm not sure what the date was that they initially had or what the status of that being open is, or off the top of my head, even what the Mountain West is doing about non-conference play. But that makes a lot of sense to me if those schools kind of do a little speed dating and play each other. And BYU could probably use that to bolster a case. It's going to be hard unless some unforeseen appetite comes about to expand the whole thing and make it 8 for a year. But who knows? They're going to have a beef.
It's just 8 conference. I think it's 8 conference games for the Mountain West.
What I'm afraid of is that the terms by which we're speculating just won't matter. Because what Alex is advocating, and Richard, you too, technically, is just add on quantity to create value, and that then you'll be able to say, hey, we played 12 games, you only played 6 or 7. If we're talking about a hypothetical playoff debate in which
I'm not even talking about quantity as far as I am talking about quality. BYU has to have some sort of quality on the schedule. This is... I just read off those spreads. This is Sisters of the Poor, guys.
This is one of those 1920s teams. It's like the 1920 Cal team
8,
is what it is.
They're only scheduled for 8 games, I think.
Okay, so they were scheduled to play Army.
And they play North. Sorry.
Go ahead.
They play North Alabama. Is the last team that's in November. I didn't even generate a spread for that because I'm sorry. Go ahead, guys.
What's funny, actually, just as an aside, is this is the same problem that plagues them in non-COVID years. Is that if you go back and look through old BYU schedules, the reason they fade out, other than the fact that they lose games, is they can't schedule power, but for maybe like 4 weeks a year. They can only really their whole idea of like we'll be just like Notre Dame, we'll have 9 or 10 FBS Power 5 opponents. It's not possible because you everybody ends up going into their conference system and then they end up playing like Southern Utah and UMass and Liberty down the back end in November. Army, if you look at their schedule, again, this is a game that was supposed to happen 2 weeks ago. And if you're BYU and you really feel like you've got an outside shot, you're undefeated, you want to try and attempt a quality win before whatever the committee is and will be, whatever happens, Army will more than likely only have one loss. Let me read you their schedule. They are 2-1 right now. They lost by 14 to a very good Cincinnati team. They have Abilene Christian, Citadel, UTSA, sound familiar? Yeah. Mercer, an Air Force team that we can talk about later that may not have a majority of its starters because of some academy rules. Tulane, Georgia Southern, and then Navy.
At so Tulane, Godfrey. At Tulane. I don't know.
Watching Tulane.
I don't know about that one.
Alex, watching Tulane the last 2 weeks, I don't know if I would swing one way or the other on anything to do with Tulane. That is a violently inconsistent offense and program right now. But my point is this. You could have an Army team capable of playing a 12-game season, possibly only having 1 or 2 losses. Why would you not just call them up and try and slot it in as soon as possible? Because that's going to be your best bet to get a quality opponent. Now, the problem is this. As I look in the show notes, just as a guess, you guys are asking, out into the ephemera, is Army a quality team? So if you schedule Army...
which is what I'm about to do.
But if you schedule Army, does the perception of that work? Probably not.
I think it works.
We're gonna get to Army in a second. My thing with Army, and again, we'll get to them in a second, that schedule is borderline FCS.
Right.
And middle borderline
and
FCS.
ULS.
Right.
And ULS. They've played. We talked last week about who are the worst teams in FBS. I mean, they've played 2 of the bottom 3 pending UMass's arrival in middle and ULM.
It is an awful schedule. But before we go to Army, we talked about the playoff. I have bad news for our friends at BYU. The playoff is not going to expand.
No,
I have bad news for our friends at the Pac-12, our 7-0 Oregon Ducks, potentially. The playoff is not going to expand. Larry Scott essentially shot his shot at the playoff committee. And in this case, this is the all 10 conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director. And basically the playoff committee said thanks but no thanks. 4 teams. They sort of blamed it on COVID and that sort of thing. They will expand one day. We know that. They're not expanding now, despite the Pac-12's pleas and the calls from our friends in Utah that will come at the end of this season if BYU does what it is supposed to do.
Godfrey,
I would like to just
go ahead.
There's one thing I've noticed.
I was about to give you what you wanted, but you go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alex. Give me one.
Do you want to talk about Army in some detail? Because I think we should do it.
Okay, I am. I would like to point out this one program that keeps coming up, and it's UTSA. All right, guys, let's just do a huddle real quick, okay? All right.
Now your father's UTSA.
Here's the deal. Let's just do a huddle real quick. All right, it's just us. No one's listening. All right. I'm just gonna go ahead and throw this out there. If UTSA beats UAB this weekend to go to 4-0.
They're not going to.
Inexplicably. No. Shh. No one can hear this but us. I'm going to make that a thing, okay? And I'm going to act like I invented it, all right? All right, break. Okay, all right, sorry, guys. All right, so anyway, Army. Man, that sample set is a little rough because God bless an MTSU and God bless a ULM, but they might be, until UMass gets back, they're bottom 3 candidates, if not number 1, right?
Yes, they are absolutely both bottom 3 candidates.
Cincinnati sat on them on Saturday.
Yeah, they did.
What Cincinnati did to them, Godfrey, was so severe that I think it calls into question whether Army is actually any good.
No.
3% post-game win expectancy for that game.
It was pretty bad.
Why? Look, how am I going to program you guys to espouse G5 doctrine? I'm trying to create
Cincinnati.
No,
Army's not a G5 team. Cincinnati sure is, though. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. Here's my thing.
Go ahead.
Cincinnati's built to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cincinnati. Here's what's so bold and lovable about my.
Well, they play Navy every year.
But this is what I'm getting at. This is why I love my Bearcats. They're not doing the UCF Memphis thing in the American, which is always thought. Everyone thought that would be the way you would close the gap, right? And you would hang with the big boys as you'd score 64. Cincinnati is just like they're Jim Tressel's Ohio State, and it's kind of working. This should not happen.
Yeah, Luke Fickell is this is the blueprint. Yeah.
They run like Wisconsin.
No, I dig it, and I dig it if you're going to bludgeon those teams, particularly because if you can get the Ohio State, Michigan State leftover talent up in the Midwest, if you can get those guys, and you have enough guys, you can run over some of these teams the way that they do. Now, again, we see the limitations of that when UCF carpet bombs them for 50 points, which I think they may be able to do this year because I think UCF is, again, pretty legit. But yeah, as far as Army, which is where we started, I mean, I don't know how you really and truly judge this Army team based on this schedule. I mean, it's just
here's one thing that I do worry about with Army, and it is hard to judge them because they were playing on beginner and then turned it all the way up to the hardest difficulty. Army has so far been missing something that I think has been important for them and has been important for a lot of flexbone teams over the years. And don't laugh when I say this. Army's passing game, it's not there. One of the more important facets of a good flexbone offense is that when you air it out, you've kind of lulled the defense to sleep and you hit some very explosive plays. And that's why we regularly see at the top of any number of explosive passing metrics a bunch of Paul Johnson teams, service academies. Army does not have that right now. Their new quarterback, Kelvin Hopkins, is not there anymore. Their new quarterback is Christian Anderson, who has gone and basically put up zeros in the passing game through 3 weeks, including when they threw it 3 and 4 times against ULM and Middle. He was 2 of 4 for 28 yards, which was fine against Middle in the first game. I'm just looking at it here. He was 0 for 3 against ULM. Again, didn't really matter because you're just running over him. But against Cincinnati, you get into a game where you have to throw a bit because you're well behind and you're in a lot of very unfavorable down and distance situations, and it was just ugly. And I think that if Army does not figure out some kind of vertical component to go with their meat and potatoes running game, it's going to be a problem for them. And that's why I'm not overly optimistic. Richard?
Braves tied 0-0, 2 men on, no men out, bottom of the 13th. How are we looking over there, big guy?
I was trying to make noise quietly.
The Rays are up 3-0, so I'm feeling good.
Okay, we're all staring at something else. That's good to know. Everything you said is correct, Alex. I will caution you against one thing. I did a freelance story 4 years ago about every pass attempt that Army had in a single season, because it was only like 21 or something like that. And I wrote like 50 words about each of them. But in doing so, I was talking with their staff, with Coach Munkin, and with Brent Davis, their offensive coordinators, because he arranges that stuff specifically. Army, if you're looking, this is a dangerous area to tread into, pure triple option. They're probably still the closest to it of the other teams that run it. And what they will do, because remember, not long ago, Army suffered a pretty brutal losing streak to Navy. They would spend the entire year pocketing things and putting things on film that were of a particular look just so they could pass out of it 6 or 7 or 8 games later. So what I'm saying is this. Army's coming off of an embarrassment to Navy last year. They were playing 2 teams, ad hoc, out of nowhere, that they didn't have on their schedule in Middle and ULM. There's a chance they're just in like second gear on purpose. And there's a lot of stuff that I don't really think that they had the capability of doing against Cincinnati. So, Alex, you are right for now. However, I think they might actually just be saving the 3 bullets that they have in the chamber for Air Force, for Navy, for possibly having to do something against Georgia Southern because it's a very similar offense, and then maybe winning the Tulane game. That's usually, they get more creative when they play teams that look like them.
Very fair, and we will wait to see if this is Army subterfuge, and they have been stringing me along. I want to talk about
the Army.
Before we talk about some business, I want to talk about one more team that kind of has some, what the hell is going on here? What really are they vibes? And that is Baylor, and I wanted to make sure we got to this. Baylor just played their first game. They beat Kansas 47-14. This was after Baylor had to call off a game against Houston the week before. It wasn't great. I mean, they won by roughly the margin that you would expect against Kansas, but they were not dominant at all. The yards per play were about 5-4. The first downs were 24-20. Kansas had multiple turnovers in Baylor's half of the field that made the margin a little bit bigger than it would have been. Charlie Brewer was not great, and also I think took at least one pretty heavy hit up high, and that's scary because he has a very bad history with concussions. It seems like there's a lot of Vegas skepticism around this team too. I think they were favored by like less than a touchdown against Houston in that game that didn't happen because I guess we expect Houston will be a bit better and Baylor will be a bit worse, but it still seemed like that was a lot. They are a 3-point favorite this week at a not great West Virginia in a game that computers say they should win by more like 10. So
that is a vested interest for your boy on the.
It is for me as well, and so maybe I'm just asking.
Yeah, dude, West Virginia is.
I don't think they're very good. Yeah, and we know this because we both lost money on West Virginia at Oklahoma State last week, so we both watched this closely. They are not very good.
We did get very wishful last week.
Yes.
involving the ears or the mountain. I forgot about that.
Can I just put it to you, because there's a lot of new faces at Baylor. There's a new head man. There are a lot of new faces on defense. Offense, at least at the skill positions, they have a lot of guys back, although Denzel Mims is not there. Do we think Baylor is good?
I don't know yet. And I'm not using it as a cop-out. I think with that defense, the way Dave wants to play it on defense, I don't think you know until you play a team that isn't Kansas. Like, I just don't.
It's just Coastal Carolina beat up Kansas way worse in terms of the actual run of play. Beat them up way worse than Baylor did, which was concerning.
The correct answer is that no one knows. All right, so there's no reason to fashion a take when one is not needed. However, I will say this. I know just from talking to coaching sources and kind of hearing gossip in the industry, the thing that made Baylor, especially when you consider what Baylor started off as when Matt Rule walked in the door, was player-led culture. And I don't try to term like that out loosely because I don't think go.
Did they score?
Yeah,
they
won finally.
Game over?
Wow. Go
Holy
Braves.
shit! Holy shit!
No, leave it in. Leave it in.
They put
We'll
8
decide
in
if
the
I leave it
fucking
in.
infield. They put 8
No, we're
in the
leaving it
fucking
in.
infield. And Freeman popped it over all 8 of those motherfuckers. Oh, God, catharsis. Fuck
We're
me.
definitely leaving it in.
Fuck
Alex,
me. Wait, hang on. Let me take it back. 3, 2, 1. Richard's right. The correct answer, the logical answer is that we don't know yet because, again, sample size. And it's okay to say that for the first 4 weeks of a season, especially this one. What I know from talking to coaching sources and the rep that Baylor got under Matt Rule, when you look at how that program started and the circumstances they inherited, was that he pushed player-led culture. And that is such a lazy, abused talking point in the media. I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. So this is where I'm trying to go with this. Dave Aranda, schematics guy, intellectual, incredibly soft-spoken. Every time I've been around him on or off the record, just the guy looks like he should be at a room at NASA with a short sleeve dress shirt on. Like, he's so hyper intelligent, but he's not going to come in and assert his will or tamper with anything. So my guess is this. Before we know what Dave Aranda is responsible for, good or bad, at Baylor, you're going to see a trailing off effect of the culture instilled under Rule for at least a couple games. And I would just point out, especially against Kansas, man. It's Kansas.
Yeah, I it's going to take a little bit to get his thumb imprint on that program. I don't know how. This is my question. I don't know how. I don't know what his imprint really looks like because I don't really know his personality outside of his intellect. If your intellect is your personality, I think that's okay. I think that is that's a Chris Peterson style of sort of management and program management.
Yeah.
I get it, but I just if that's what it's going to be, okay, let's see it. I just haven't seen it. I don't know. We didn't have. I think part of the reason we don't know is because we didn't have a normal off season where me and you could go to Waco. Like, I didn't get a chance to go to Waco for a week this year. I didn't get a chance to go talk to him. I didn't get a chance to do those types of things for myriad reasons that we're all aware of. But the weird summer has gotten me to a point where I can do some pretty cool things like thinking out loud every Monday, SEC Network.
Business
How
time.
about it?
That
First
transition, they
That-
grow up so fast. I'm
Such
so
a-
proud.
That's how we do it. First episode this week. It was weird. It was really weird. Like Godfrey, you've done TV in a normal lifetime, a normal time.
Yeah, there's usually like 9 people around you and people touching your face and that kind of stuff. Obviously, that didn't happen for you. You looked very pretty. Before you say it, I'll say it and get it out of the way. What
The skincare routine is working, folks.
what were the parameters as far as like, were you by yourself?
Yes, basically. I think people need to realize that, not in a bad way, but like even ESPN is flying by the seat of its pants with production, details and finer points. I'm not saying that to disparage my employer. I'm saying that to say that like it's a weird year and nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's just trying to figure it out. We had a couple production meetings last week. We in a normal year, I would have probably flown to Charlotte, and me and Spencer and Alyssa and Brandon would have probably done a rehearsal show. In a normal year, I'd be flying to Charlotte every weekend and doing the show on Monday, flying in Sunday, doing the show Monday and flying home. But that's obviously not the way we did it. So Brandon and Spencer went to a rented studio in Atlanta. I went to ESPN's Seaport studio space in Lower Manhattan, which is where they do Monday Night Countdown now. They do it on the roof there. They used to do Bomani's show in there. They do First Take in there too.
It's really nice. I was there.
It's beautiful.
Spencer and I did the podcast with Bomani on like paying players and stuff last year at the Seaport. It was like, it's a really cool space. Shout out to ESPN.
It's literally in the East River, basically. The building is. So I've been there before because I did Feinbaum there. So I was a little bit, I knew the lay of the land, which I think for the first time I was doing the show was okay and good. Because for me, I find that I was more nervous about the logistics. Like I was more nervous about like me and my girlfriend had to go to Sephora and get makeup. There weren't makeup people there. I had to learn how to do makeup.
So she's the real
my own
MVP of
makeup.
this entire affair.
Oh, of course. She's the straw that stirs the drink. I swiped a makeup wipe in my eyeball when removing the makeup. Do not recommend. That hurts. So there were some weird things. So basically, like I got there, walked in. I was greeted by one person, and she was with a team of people who were sort of setting up the shoot. There is a big sort of monitor behind me that has the background that you saw if you watched the show. And then there's just a chair sitting there. And I look into basically a souped up webcam that is behind a sort of semi-translucent monitor. So I see what you see on the TV in that monitor, and the camera's sort of behind that. And I just sort of talk into that the whole hour.
And you were doing this pretty much completely live, right?
Yeah, so here's some TV magic. Because we didn't do a full rehearsal show, our producers were like, let's tape one of the segments beforehand so that we can give you guys a break during the live show. And this is another contingency thing. Like originally we were going to do the whole show taped. And then a week ago, they were like, we should actually do the whole thing live. And then they were like, let's actually bump one of the segments to tape, and so that we can sort of get the feel for each other and stuff like that. And that's sort of what we ended up doing. They cut it on, and it's actually the third segment in the show. But the third segment we recorded first, and it's the one where we talk about the Auburn Georgia game. But it is a souped up Zoom call. I mean, that's what it is. It's incredible that all the production value that goes into it to kind of gussy it up and make it look good. I mean, I'm not just like saying this because they're paying me money. Like the guys who I'm working with on this show, the producers behind the scenes, they're incredible. I don't know how they're sort of fitting this show into the broader constellation of contingencies that they have to figure out about games and whatever. Like I asked Alyssa Lang, I was like, where are you going week 2? she's a sideline reporter on Saturday. She was at the Tennessee South Carolina game week 1. I was like, so where are you going week 2? She was like, I don't know. They'll tell me when it's like okay to go, sort of thing. Like it's just.
She's extremely talented. Very good.
I'm very proud of you, young sir.
Thank you.
However, there's still so many lessons to teach. Could you tell me one more time, for the first time, the show, the network, and the time it airs?
I did it.
I was about to bring it back around to that.
One more time.
I did it. Thinking Out Loud, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central on SEC Network. I will add.
Beautiful.
Spencer on the full cast.
Yeah.
Said it was on ESPN like 5 times. So I'm better than him.
I think at this point, and I would say under mine and others' tutelage in our consortium, that you would know now not to take advice on doling particulars from Professor Hall. I think we made that abundantly clear in the syllabus, like the first day. Alex, what other business we have? Oh, by the way, I work for Banner Society. Read those articles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's my plug.
We've got a lot of great friends at Banner Society, and we would love if you would check out the work that they do there for sure. I want to quickly thank our buddies over at Home Field Apparel who helped us fulfill a very nice promotion where, it's no secret that we are trying very hard to get the word out about this show. We are going to be emphasizing, especially over the first couple of months, subscribers. So we did a little thing where if you followed the Twitter account, which we'd love for you to do if you haven't already, and you reviewed the show on Apple or some other platform, we would send you either a copy of The Sinful Seven, the ebook that we worked on together, or a shirt from Home Field. You will be surprised that of the 20 winners, 20 out of 20 picked the shirt. I think that most of them,
they probably all
the vast
bought the book,
majority,
right?
stated that they already bought the book, so I would not buy the book twice. Although a few people said that.
When are we getting print? I'm pissed here.
Maybe eventually. We would love to do that if it works right.
So I hope there will be printed books for us, the group, the crew, pretty soon. But as far as wider publication, that's the fever dream. And I'll just say this: one would hope that with 2 authors who have been on television, we would be able to spin some sort of clout into a book deal. If there is a book agent listening to this podcast,
I'm sure there's many.
Probably many. But I do want to say that Connor and the team at Home Field, they have been incredibly nice to us in a lot of ways. One of which was, I said, Connor, we will, obviously pay for all of these shirts. Just let us know what they are, and we will send you money. They refused to hear of that and are just going to fulfill these shirt orders very soon for everybody. They're just really good people over there. Richard and I have hung out with them personally. Godfrey has as well, in a different setting, all in the great state of Indiana. And we like them a lot. Also, their shirts are comfortable. I'm wearing a Blaster the Borough Colorado School of Mines shirt right now, which you can see because podcasting is a visual medium. So thank you guys. We appreciate you. And if you're listening, you should check them out.
I got my fall stack. I just want to as if you didn't need another.
What's your number one?
I just got my here's my number one is always the same, Alex, for 3 years now. My fall stack is because I wear so much Home Field. They Connor will see it and be like, we need to send you fresh ones as well as new ones. So I wear a couple of designs just religiously. I actually wear the plain Home Field sweatshirt a lot. So he sent me a new one of those. My Army sweatshirt with the traditional insignia on it, with the helmet and the sword. I got a fresh one of those. I got a whole new Georgia Southern wardrobe because I did an Instagram Q&A for Banner Society 2 weeks ago at Banner Society on Instagram. And my original Home Field shirt is the Georgia Southern eagle with the cartoon eagle with his chest out. It was so faded. Connor's like, we gotta re-up that. So also new ones. See, I have a tough time. Like Alex, you're wearing School of Mines. I have to have some sort of connection to a school to wear it in public.
Oh, I don't. I wore a Michigan
Richard, you're
State
like
shirt
that too, right?
I will not. I will not wear non-University of Florida college apparel.
You won't.
I love Connor to death.
You're a Puritan.
I
absolutely would and do.
You wouldn't wear just something super weird like Mines, like way out there.
I may wear mines.
Here's what I will say.
But I'm not.
I think that these shirts.
They play FBS football and they in Florida.
These shirts are cool enough that, and they are soft enough and comfortable enough that, like, I wear the Michigan State shirt. Michigan State is probably one of the bottom 5 coolest schools in the world. I think Mizzou was a shirt coming out like a couple days ago. It should be in the mail probably to me now. Mizzou, not cool, really, in my opinion, in much of a way, but I'm going to wear it anyway. So we just want to say, again, thank you to our friends over there at Home Field for their help with getting this podcast off the ground. And if you are willing to tell someone to subscribe, make sure you're following it on Twitter, your preferred podcast feed, etc. That helps us a lot. And as a thank you,
you know who? Hold on. You know who does have printed copy of the book? Podcat. He has printed copies of the book. I don't know how he did it, but I know he's listening to this. Holla at your boys.
Yeah, wait, yeah.
We got to take some questions.
Don't hold out.
We got to take some questions.
I don't know how he got it.
Who has participated in this, though.
I don't know how he got it, but Podcat's got a printed copy of the book. I've seen it. And not just printed it on your printer or your work printer, which the people who did that, y'all are incredible. Truly incredible. Okay, Alex, your question is up first from Chris J and B in the Discord. I will absolutely let you plug the Discord in 1 second. But the question is there a single place in the country a G5 program can out-recruit a P5? If this were to ever happen, where would it be? Would it have to be a place like Florida or somewhere else overflowing with talent? Holy hell, I can't read. Go ahead.
So it's a good question. It's such a good question that I asked a buddy of mine who runs recruiting at a Group of 5 program about this exact issue. He had a list for me. He said the list of Group of 5 schools right now that are consistently landing Power 5 talent: Cincinnati, Boise, UCF. None of those especially surprising. I think Boise has punched above its weight in recruiting for a while. There will be years where there's only like maybe 2 or 3 4-star recruits who commit to a Group of 5 school, and 2 of them are at Boise. UCF, I think, has kind of joined this fold in the last few years, and I would suspect, though Richard, you tell me if I'm wrong, that they have benefited from sort of the democratization of Florida recruiting, where it's not dominated by the big 3 as much as it used to.
Yeah, but I want to be sort of clearer about what P5 talent is. P5 talent is P5 talent. P5 talent does not mean that UCF is getting players that Florida State, Miami, and Florida want. Does not mean Cincinnati is getting players that Ohio State wants. That there's a difference there. And this is the thing, like Bud would talk about this when we would talk about Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech came on strong recruiting. We've seen what they do. But it doesn't mean that Georgia Tech is getting players that Georgia wants. So the difference between P5 talent and the sort of one-to-one recruiting wins that you actually do.
Very much.
In state.
My contact, who again runs recruiting for a G5 school, so the schools that are kind of on the doorstep of doing this, Louisiana, they are Louisiana this week.
Disagree because he's not going to be there that long.
At the moment, they are Louisiana because of their victory against Georgia Southern last weekend. Houston should be on this list, but is not at the moment. Memphis, ebbing and flowing, and San Diego State not, but should, and perhaps will when they get the benefits of a new stadium that I believe opens next year. Richard, Winston Underwood on Twitter.
No, hold on. Godfrey got something.
Yeah, I would say this. Some of those answers, and I really like the way he did it in 2 tiers, actually explain the other one. So, I'll start. So the first school he mentions that kind of jumps out at you is Boise, because obviously Idaho is not developing P5 talent. What they did was out-evaluate and out-recruit the secondary market for pretty much every territory west of the Rockies and areas of Texas and California. They are so good because he said San Diego State should be better. Boise recruits smarter, and Boise is more attractive, and they're really sort of a baby Oregon in their branding initiative to young players, and that's why schools like San Diego State and Fresno and honestly a lot of like Pac-12 schools don't get some of the players that Boise does. The rest, it's pretty simple, right? Like UCF, they were created out of scratch to do this, to do what they're doing. Same with USF, same with all these schools in the Sun Belt. Cincinnati, the first time I met Luke Fickell when he was Cincinnati head coach, he said, "Hey, we're having practice at Moeller High School." in Cincinnati. So that was their emphasis for one spring was they practiced at a different high school every single day. That gives you an idea of what he was focused on. It was not installing an offense. I would agree with Louisiana, although I think Richard kind of said this under his breath. Like, Napier's going to leave. However, if you believe all of sort of the pablum and the talking points from LSU and Ed Orgeron about closing that state up and keeping their camps in state, Louisiana would benefit even more than Tulane because the admissions are easier, and also that's a place where you could run an attractive offensive system. So maybe once Napier leaves, it doesn't drop off too much. Houston, I mean, Major Applewhite, and really honestly, nobody talks about this, but like the last sort of bit of time that Tom Herman was at UH, there's not a lot of stellar recruiting there. It's certainly not left on the roster. So they're going to need 2 or 3 more years before they are like the Houston that came on and beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl.
I am interested in Houston. I think we need to talk about Houston probably next week. Alex, where'd that question come from?
That question was from the Discord, our beloved Discord member, Chris J and B. We would love it if you joined us on Discord. You can do that via our Patreon page, patreon.com/mooncrew. That's a good way to support our work. We've turned it into a thing that has more than 1,000 people.
It's a good way to get your question answered.
It's a good way to get your question answered. It's also a great way if you like this podcast or the newsletter or anything we do to support the work. And it's a lot of fun, and there's good rooms in there. So we would love to have you via our Patreon page. Richard, a question for you. This one comes from Twitter, from Winston Underwood. Is there anything that programs are doing differently schematically to take advantage of the conditions COVID has created, those being less practice time, less conditioning, etc.?
I think it depends. I think the less practice time, I think, is definitely real. I think you're just sort of taking out periods of practice, sort of. I should be clear there. A college football practice is broken up into, what is it, Godfrey? It's like 25 periods usually. Mm-hmm. This can get sort of like loose, but roughly periods are like 7 minutes long.
Usually, yeah.
And sometimes they'll combine periods. Sometimes and I'm probably not supposed to say this, sometimes they'll stop the clock if they want to keep what's like during team period.
Yep.
They'll blow the whistle to go to the next period.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll just not switch. But yeah, so I think you're taking out periods out of practice. Also, it's just base. You're going to be doing a lot more base stuff, particularly with coaches who may be earlier in their tenures because there was no spring. Spring is where you sort of lay the bedrock for some of the stuff that you're going to do as a new coach. And obviously no spring, you didn't have that. So you're going to see probably more base stuff this season. You may see, as the season gets going, maybe more retrofitted stuff a little bit later in the season, depending. And I don't know if teams really want to do that because it's sort of hard to do. You run what you run. But as far as base stuff, I mean, there's some schemes that are more ready to rock with their base stuff. Air raid, check. Godfrey, you got a question from Charles Fulton on Twitter. Are you surprised that Chris Creighton isn't drawing more interest from Power 5 programs?
I think you have to give it time. This is, we got to find new ways to say the same thing over and over. COVID. But the MAC not playing right now hurts. I think the way Eastern plays hurts him a little bit because we were talking about this kind of like Kentucky finding a way to like finesse ugly you. Man, that's Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan, they beat you ugly, they beat you mean. I think the other thing that's kind of lacking for him is that we've all, and this is, when I say we, I'm talking media, analysts, retired coaches, people in the industry, search firms. We set a bar for max success, and max success is double-digit wins and either like playing for or winning the conference title. What Eastern Michigan has done is remarkable when you look at the history of the program because they were abysmal. They were terrible. They were UMass, New Mexico State, probably where ULM's headed. Like, them being competitive, to me, is a calling card for the next level job, whether you go to the American, whether you get a smaller Big Ten job, whatever. The problem is the most games he's won in a season so far is 7. They need to change that. That's probably the shortest solution. I will say this. He's highly respected in coaching circles. I don't know if you can look at Eastern and go, okay, he sort of finished the job there the way that you would normally track an upstart MAC coach.
Fair enough. Richard, one for you here from Roheezy, I believe, on Twitter. This is a question. What do we think there will be more of? Saban national titles.
Sabanor back, baby.
Oh my God! Woo!
Nick Saban national titles or coaching changes in the Power 5 this offseason. I believe that to translate, the number of Saban national titles is 5 at this stage. Is that correct, or is it 6?
Yeah, but if we're doing Sabanor the right way, is Sabanor still 2? So the over under is 2.5.
Yeah, I mean it's getting elderly, but I would say
He's getting older.
I would say right now that in a COVID shortened year, again, like it's not fun to say this, but like I have yet to be disabused of the idea that it will be a Clemson Alabama national title. So let's like pencil another shot at one this year, and then you would assume, Richard, another shot at 1 and 3 more in the following 3 subsequent 3 seasons. So I would stay with just 2.
Yeah, okay, we'll go 2, and so if we think he's got 5 years left, which is about what I think he's got left.
So 5 to win 2.
Tremendous.
We'll call the over on 5 to win 2. We'll call the over under 2.5. I do not subscribe to this notion that coaches are not going to get fired this year in the P5. In
Really?
the P5, I don't, not really. Definitely not less than 3 in the P5.
If they're still getting raises, they're still going to get fired, right? I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
Pruitt just got a $400,000 raise for doing. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Okay, all right.
If they're still getting raises like Jeremy Pruitt's getting a raise before the season started, I think that it is going to be. I think it will be less of an open season in late October, November. Well, I guess maybe December. Some of these firings are going to come Christmas time.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough Christmas. Yeah.
Because of when the season's going to end. But yeah, I'm not one of these people that thinks they're going to be that program's going to be overly gun shy. I think a couple are going to do the surprising thing that they were probably going to do anyway.
I definitely wouldn't disagree. I just, I'm pretty jaded and cynical and old and mean about college football, but I think even I would be surprised right now. We talked about this last week. I ran the numbers on South Carolina because that was the obvious SEC firing. Maybe, Richard, if it's Texas, honestly, because Texas has withstand COVID God level money to be able to do things. I don't know how, if you are the South Carolinas of the world, how you do it. I still don't see financially how you do it unless you would
watch. Watch.
To be clear, Godfrey, you are more plugged in than me about this, and I have no reason to doubt that your information is very strong on this. I'm just a skeptic.
Yeah.
I'm just a skeptic about.
I think what may happen is a borderline case.
Alex, you've been trained well.
I think a borderline case.
Yeah.
That's where you may see the gun shy.
Okay.
In another year maybe they do it, but not if you're borderline. But I think if you're bad enough, and I'm not saying South Carolina's necessarily going to be bad enough, I'm saying sort of in general.
Okay, so what
if you're bad enough,
pick your schools.
Happen.
And don't I'll give you this. You
you
don't have to include the Big Ten or the Pac-12 yet, just because we have zero idea.
I have a very specific one for you, and this is actually another question,
sir.
And our very next question, and based in the state in which you now live. Sam Tashida on Twitter asked, could this year be the end of the Rick Stockstill era at Middle Tennessee? We have talked numerous times on this program about how bad things are there right now. So do you think it's the end, and who or what kind of coach would you see them going after if this were the end?
Well, let's roll those together.
Yeah.
So let's roll those questions together. So if we're talking P5s that are playing right now, where the seat is hot, listen to what I'm saying. Where the seat is hot or warm, I think there are some obvious ones. I think Vanderbilt's probably an obvious one. I think South Carolina is an obvious one if it goes south. I think South Carolina is a place where maybe if it's borderline, the seat, we trend cool. But if it gets rough, I think the heat gets turned up just like in a normal year.
Let me address the Stockstill thing first. I think that I think, yes, it could happen. I think I'm not really sure exactly why it's petered out in the way that it has, because they've become fundamentally unsound and just embarrassingly bad. Maybe he's trying to get fired. I don't have the particulars on his contract. I did check. He's at right about $1 million a year. I think that could happen, but that is less of an impossible ask in COVID, as like the situation with Will Muschamp is that you're looking at like a buyout over $10 million. Okay, and that would be the same 4 months in which the athletic director goes to the University of South Carolina in the state of South Carolina and saying, well, our athletics budget is about $65 million short. So to me, when I said earlier, and let me clarify on this, because don't you out cynic me, Alex Kirshner. Right now I'm still kind of gobsmacked at the idea of that level of firing. Now, shifting gears on a lower level where you could swallow a pill like that, that's a lot more possible. That feels more likely. My thing at the beginning of the year was like, is Virginia Tech going to fire Justin Fuente, which, by the way, Tech, looked like a house of fire all of a sudden. Is South Carolina going to fire Will Muschamp? What's Dave Doran going to do at NC State? Those are kind of my three, those both being like public schools and COVID affected. I thought, well, maybe all three of those guys get a mulligan.
Rick Stockstill's buyout as of last December, and you're not going to believe this when I say this, was $6.6 million.
Jesus.
Are we so sure he's not just
incredible agenting work? And this was a Discorder pointing this out to us, whose identity I will not reveal in case they do not want to be discussed in this forum. But 6.6, that is a legit SEC buyout. I would guess that it's more in the 4 or 5 region now without having the contract in front of me, but it's a lot for a school like that to make that kind of firing in any environment.
He is 62.
Incredible.
Rick Stockstill.
Are we good to move on to the next one?
So the talk locally here was that because his kid has gone through the program already, that he may want to hang it up, and because the program is just flatlined, y'all. I generally try not to step on the lower class in college football, but like, they do nothing to market themselves. They do nothing to differentiate themselves. Like, you've seen more energy in 2 years at a program that was built out of nothing at Charlotte than you've seen Nashville's one of the boom cities of the United States economy over the last 15 years, and Middle just does nothing with it. Western Kentucky has more of a presence in this city that I live in than Middle Tennessee State does.
He has been there for 15 years.
He almost got hired by Maryland.
Years.
He almost got hired by Maryland.
Wait, which time?
Speaking of Maryland.
Yeah, speaking of Maryland.
Alex. Speaking of Maryland. Alex, Marco PhD on Twitter. You keep saying the Pitt front is legit. Both of us do. Wow, sounds of the city are good today. Is that defense comparable to 2013 Michigan State? Is there a world where Pitt reaches that in the near future?
So it's not.
That's bold.
It's not
I'm sorry not to jump on this.
That's
a lot.
That's bold.
It's not the worst comp in the world insofar as the same guy, Pat Narduzzi, coaches it. But I don't think that maybe the defenses are somewhat comparable. I think Pitt at the moment is 5th in defensive SP+, and that Michigan State team was like 3rd. The difference is that this Pitt offense is like bad, at least so far. Like, they are 99th, whereas that Michigan State team was 66th. Pitt also has a Clemson in their conference, whereas the 2013 Big Ten had a not quite yet all the way back the way that you know them now, Ohio State, after Tressel had left and Meyer had come in. So I don't think that the outcomes, I don't think that Pitt is going to have a 1-loss season and play in a marquee bowl game. But I would absolutely love, as you all know, to be proven wrong on that.
Alex, Brian Walker on Twitter. I live in Minnesota, but did not attend the flagship university. What's your opinion of PJ Fleck and his whole deal? It seems incredibly forced to me that I had not read this question before. It seems incredibly forced to me, but it also might be working. Can't figure it out.
So I've only hung out with PJ Fleck one time, which was like the better part of an hour at Big Ten Media Days a few years ago. I interviewed him for a story that we were working on at SB Nation. But I also, talked to a number of people about this and just like have heard in the last 3 years from, we've seen a lot of people talking about him. Yeah, it's real. He's like that. That's his thing. He's a different kind of dude, but it is real, in my opinion. I don't know. Godfrey, Richard, you guys ever talked to him?
Yeah, this is the anecdote I got. He a rival school in that division, their position coach, told me, I want to say it was last recruiting cycle, I kind of asked him the same thing, like how much of that shtick is real? What's the situation there? And he said, we don't mind it personally. We know him. He's a fine human being, whatever. We mind it professionally. It gets annoying. And he's the type of guy who will only get more annoying as he gets successful, which justifies it. He said, but if there's ever a way down, if there's ever like a decline, that's the coaching staff that you blow out, is basically what he said. He's like, you put an extra 14 on them if you get the chance.
Rashad Bateman is coming back for Minnesota. I saw today. That's going to be cool for them. I'll say this: having talked to some guys on that staff, either you're with it or you're not. And if you're not with it, you find a different place to work. Because if you're not with it, you can't do it. You can't hack it. You can't fake it to be on the train there. So don't, and go work somewhere else. But if you're on board, row the boat.
Absolutely. Row it.
Godfrey, last question from Refrigerator191 on Twitter. A lot of national writers seem really enamored with the 10-team conference schedule because it creates more big-name matchups. But if you're like us and eat the whole hog, this is anathema because it kills out-of-conference games. How likely is it that this is the new normal?
Right now, I would say highly unlikely because the economics didn't change. Okay, the world around us changed. So the bottom line is that the SEC network, the Big Ten network, all these networks, ACC, they require inventory, which means it's awesome that we're getting 10 SEC games this year. But the total volume of games aired on the SEC network and the ESPN family of networks for the ACC, for the SEC, and for any other conference that they have a contract with is going down. The bottom line is when you have Florida host Idaho on the second Saturday in September, that game goes to the SEC network. The university makes a box office receipt off of that. The city of Gainesville, for instance, makes money on condo rentals and restaurant tabs. This entire system is not great. I'm not saying it's fair. It's sort of based in a dumbass perception of trickle-down economics, but it's not going anywhere, okay?
It can't. It can't.
Well, I just also think that the brutality of a 10-game SEC schedule is not something we've thought about yet because we haven't seen it, and we're about to.
Sure.
I think that people hate these. I think it's really fashionable to hate these games, and I think that people don't understand that there's an advantage. I wrote about this summer at Banner. Like, there's a coaching advantage to having that game. There's
no preseason.
There's an AD's advantage to having that game. There's a player's advantage to having that game. There's an industry advantage, network, fundraising weekends. I think a lot of people don't understand the power of bringing your big cat donors onto campus for a weekend in which you get them drunk in a luxury box, and they're pretty much guaranteed a 40-point victory against some hapless opponent. All of this serves a greater purpose. And so I really think the genuine complaint comes from outside of football, but this purist crap about the SEC only plays 8 or so-and-so plays 9 and we don't want to see these games, like, just here's my thing. I acknowledge that SoCon Saturday got to be a little obnoxious. So spread it out a little bit. But otherwise,
and they did.
Just do it.
To their credit, they did.
But the bottom line was, like, you know, they were saying that jokingly when some Big Ten team was running through, like, Purdue and Rutgers and Maryland in November.
Florida State added Monroe that one year to get bowl eligible.
Whereas
don't act like it doesn't.
Whereas like Alabama was starting the month with LSU and ending it with Auburn. So I mean, you're talking about top 10 opponents. So it was a little bit. It was a lot, much ado about nothing, and it's an extremely regional argument.
I would also say, and I'm not naive enough at all to think that what I'm about to say is the reason why these games won't go away, but I think it is kind of some support for them. A lot of the people who are in these jobs at Power 5 institutions, whether that's your head coach or your athletic director, where did they work before they worked at Alabama or wherever? Mm-hmm. They worked at
Louisiana Monroe,
Austin P or ULM, exactly. And I think that on the part of a lot of those people, there is sort of a sense of obligation, tradition to give that opportunity to that young up-and-coming coach and their players at another school. I am way too cynical to think that this is the driving reason why these games will never go away. But I do think that, and Godfrey, you can tell me if my heart is just not cold enough, but I do think that
dude, you're exactly
a factor that exists.
You're exactly right, Alex. I mean, and it's okay to call it cronyism because, I mean, the people involved call it cronyism.
It's the good cronyism.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, like, you can say what you want, but there is a double-digit number of FBS programs that exist because of this, and if you take it away, they will not exist, y'all. They will not make the money. They need the $1.5 million check to fund not only football, but multiple other sports. So, yeah, they're going to trot their butts into Auburn or Florida State or wherever and get murdered. I understand the quality of that football experience is not commiserate with, like, Red River or something, but it serves a purpose greater than the football part of football.
Indeed. All right, tasting menu, vested interests. Early on in the day, 11 a.m., East Carolina, Georgia State. The vested interest is very interested in Georgia State winning this game outright, given that it is a pick'em. As far as
very much the same, we're on the same bus.
As far as what I actually want to watch on the big screen is TCU and Texas. I want to know what Texas is. I want to know whatever that was last Saturday. If that's what Texas is, or if Texas is going to be solid, good, decent football team. The birdies tell me the first half may be a little odd for one of these teams. So, but yeah, I want to see Texas, and so I will be tuning in.
Richard, if Texas wins, I am genuinely curious in your evaluation of a larger, like, marked decline in Fort Worth with TCU, because I think it's time to start talking that way.
If they're doing this thing again where it's no identity, I will do this a lot longer at some point in time. But TCU needs to find an identity. I'll leave it at that. We'll talk about it later. Alex.
I'm looking forward as we get a little bit later into the afternoon, just on a vested interest level, but trust me, not at all on an entertainment level. At 3 p.m. Central, Virginia Tech at Duke.
Yes, vested interest
that
indeed.
Was vested for me at Virginia Tech minus 10.5. Someone needs to convince me why Virginia Tech is not going to win that game by a whole lot
30.
more than 10.5. Maybe we're missing something, but even if they're shorthanded by a lot of players, as they were last week, I am not sure why they should not crush.
My generated number for that, Alex, is 16. Virginia Tech by 16.
Yeah, it feels like it should be pretty big. Godfrey, this is one that is not a vested interest for me, or I think Richard, or hopefully for anybody, because we have no idea about either of the teams. Because
that's
they
why I put it on the list.
Charlotte's played once. Charlotte and Florida Atlantic. Charlotte visits FAU at 3 Central. Are you excited about this game?
I'm just really, really curious. I mean, I'm beyond curious at this point, because Willie Taggart's debut at FAU, that was a talented team that Lane Kiffin left. Charlotte and Will Healy were very much like a culture-building program in the vein of like a PJ Fleck. I mean, he's the babyface killer, or he wants to be, and he's building his career that way. These are COVID-ravaged programs. It is October, and both of these teams are essentially going out and seeing level competition for the first time. In FAU's case, for the first time. This has just been – I don't know if you can look at a game with extenuating circumstances quite like these in the history of modern college football. That's why it's on there, honestly. We'll see more directly like COVID-affected matchups. This is just the first one that just – it's all you can really talk about. And just real quick on Duke, I would say –
that offense is so bad.
I always thought, like, when David Cutcliffe was the first coach I covered as a college reporter, and I always thought, like, when he retired, I'd write him a nice letter or something. I need to write him a nice letter. It's time. It's time. No, I'm not I'm not being a dick.
I know.
But like the window closed on Duke exploiting the middle of the ACC, and like it's starting to get bad.
Particularly as North Carolina gets good. Vested a little bit later in the day. I cannot believe this is a vested interest, but Western Kentucky and Middle. The generated number is Western by 12.5. The actual spread is Western by 7, which is why I went and took it. That is at 4:00 Central Time. Navy Air Force as well. I think that is going to be closer than the experts think. So Air Force to cover a 7-point spread. And then Godfrey, this is the last one that I will posit to you. Georgia Southern, Monroe. I'm taking Monroe as a 19.5-point underdog. What is the deal right now with Georgia Southern?
COVID.
Are we okay? So it is just COVID. That's what's got them looking like this, or is there something deeper here?
Yeah, but I think COVID's the obvious, easy answer. Like if we're doing the talk radio bit, but I have not been impressed with that offense. I have not been impressed. I have not been impressed with their ability to sustain long drives. I've not been impressed with their ability to do the thing the triple does, which is lull, 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 bam. Like Alex talked about, having your massive chunk play in any fashion. They haven't been creative. They've been just sort of flat and pedestrian. I mean, really, they took advantage of a weird situation last year with App being on the road in the rain in a bad storm. But, other than that, they haven't had that standout moment that they really kind of built their early FBS identity on. I would be careful here because I don't know the depths to which ULM can fall, and that's a program that's pretty good at mining the bottom of the FBS.
Alex, night slate, not much.
No, and it's an early
Thank
night
God.
for those of us who stay awake through the last football game. The last game is the last FBS game, and I believe game period, given the landscape of college football. Is Virginia at Clemson.
Let's get up early. Let's get Will Sweeney and Brent Venables' son. Let's
Absolutely.
Herbstreit's
Get 'em out
twins.
there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you see Herbstreit.
Let's get those boys in the game and salt
You
it
see
away.
Herbstreit.
Yep.
You see a cover.
UVA is a vested interest for me at 28.5 points. And I feel pretty good about that because at some point, I mean, the one thing that I will say for UVA is that they kind of play man ball now that they have Bronco in charge, and their defense is not bad. So when Clemson's fifth string is in there, I think that we could, I expect Clemson to be covering by the end of the third quarter.
When do you think Trevor gets pulled?
But then it's do we win the fourth quarter? I think Trevor gets pulled in the third.
Okay. You think he makes it to the third quarter? They pulled him early in the second quarter against the Citadel. They're not going to Citadel Virginia, but Clemson did not beat Wake by a ton.
No, in fact they didn't cover, and some of us didn't like that.
I was fine. I think I was fine.
We're trying to we're going the other way, and we've decided that we're not going to get burned by Dabo's decision that he must play 119 players in every single game.
All right, plugs on the way out. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere. You probably do if you're listening to this. Rate and review. Help us pay rent by rating and reviewing. Godfrey, where can the people find you?
At 38 Godfrey on Twitter, on Instagram, bannersociety.com.
Alex.
You can find me at mooncrew.substack.com or on Twitter at Alex_Kirshner, KIRSHNER. Richard, what about you?
RJ_writes for me. I'm doing NFL stuff for Yahoo and Canada and DAZN. I'm doing NFL stuff with Odds Checker with you, Alex, giving some vested interests on the NFL side. Publication to be named later with a whole lot of the SB Nation cast of characters is getting closer. Go ahead and go to ptbnl.com. Yeah, that's the acronym.
Sounds about right,
and
yeah.
check that out. Throw us $1 or more if you're being charitable. Hopefully I'll be writing in another place freelance sometime very soon. But the Moon Crew newsletter is always a place where you can find my college football musings. And Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, the SEC Network, Thinking Out Loud.
Wow. Stephen, thank you, Stephen Godfrey, for coming on this podcast. We would love to have you again sometime.
I'll see if I could say, it just depends on how much Mississippi you need.
Indeed. Alex, I'll see you Sunday.
See you Sunday.